Nothing's ever as I'd like it to be, without flaws. Good enough. Everything needs improvement. At least, anybody with a project of some kind will tell you that. Always looking for another issue to fix, and of course, always finding it. If you're not careful, the issues you find can be consuming. Yet, despite knowing that, I look into them anyways. Too tempting not to. I look for an issue, I find an issue, and I fix it. As they say, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And sometimes it feels like that's all I'm surrounded by. All I have are things that need improvement. Most times all I can see are things that need fixing. Issues that exist. There's nothing wrong with always looking for things to fix, but I still worry. I worry that's all I'll ever be able to see. After all, if you're only looking for the bad, won't that be all you find? And if it is, what then? What should I do next? I mean, there's gotta be something after all. Usually, I'm quite good at finding issues. There's always something to fix after all. But recently, at least with the S4, I feel like I'm in a tough spot. I don't know if that's really the right way to say it, actually. More like I'm in a staging area. Not quite ready to start the next big project, but also not really sure what to do in the present. But I mean, it's a B5. There has to be something that needs fixing, right? And I mean, sure, there's little things to polish up, but honestly, I'm looking for big things right now. Something I can spend a weekend doing to take my mind off of bigger things. And at the moment, the only thing I could think to upgrade wasn't really that big of a job whatsoever. In fact, it was pretty small. I guess I still need to fix the fitment in the front. The wheels don't clear the new Brembos without spacers after all, and I could definitely run smaller ones that are on there. But is that really everything? That's not really a good use of a weekend. It's just not enough. I guess I just have to look harder to find something. I mean, there's always another issue, right? So that is exactly what I did. I dedicated the next couple days to looking for a problem to fix. And the scary thing about doing that is when you look for problems, you're almost guaranteed to find them, even if finding them wasn't for the best. It sure took a while for the issue to make itself apparent, but it definitely did. And what brought it to my attention wasn't even driving the S4 itself. I've got something on my mind, something going on behind the scenes. A much bigger project, and an even bigger story for another day. Lately, it's been consuming almost all of my thoughts. Things like this you either have to think about or distract yourself from. And as far as distractions go, I was doing pretty poorly. Yet, it was actually in this distraction that I found the next step, the next project for the S4. It's always in times that I urgently need to shift that I remember how good the shifting in this car feels. I wonder how much of it's due to the short shifter. All the cars I've put one in have felt way better. The TT, the E30, and the S4. Wait, I love the gear change in the S4, but I didn't put a short shifter in there. There's just no way I haven't done that yet. It's one of my favorite mods after all. But if I'm right, I might have just found the next best thing to do. Alright, the moment of truth. Does this shifter have enough play to warrant a short shifter? According to the throw, I'm not actually sure. It's nowhere near as short as the TT or the E30, so maybe it is stock. Either way, I definitely think a replacement is a good idea. Underneath, the little ball and socket seems to have way more play than it really should, so that would absolutely explain why it's notchy and not in a good way. And given that most everything is plastic, I could see it being stock. Looks like I found something to fix. I drove home that night, excited, finally distracted from the thing that's been eating all of my attention. I had something to do, something to work on. I ordered both a billet short shifter and some properly sized spacers for the front. And shockingly, despite not paying for any sort of fast shipment whatsoever, less than 12 hours later, one of them showed up. The only question left is, which one was it? The box was completely nondescript, and since both were ordered from the same place, the shipping label was no help either. The only way I'll figure out what's inside is to open it, and either way I can't complain. A 12-hour delivery time is cool no matter what it is. Spacers it is. As much as I was hoping it would be the short shifter, this will be good too. It'll be less of a distraction, really hardly any time at all to install, but it'll be an improvement nonetheless. Here's the dilemma. As much as I would have loved to run these wheels without spacers, with our upgraded Brembos on the front, that's not going to be possible. Unless we shaved either the inside of the wheels or the calipers themselves, this is going to be a sad reality. But that being said, we can make it better than it currently is. Right now, the front is just running the old 10mm spacers from the old brake setup, and they're really not ideal. They push the wheels out a lot further than we need, and they also cause the tires to rub on the fender. So, since we have to run spacers, running the smallest ones we can is the new goal, and that's where these H&Rs come in. These are 5mm spacers, exactly half of what was on the car, and hopefully this still gives us enough clearance to run the wheels. The good news is size-wise, these are kind of perfect for the caliper. It's closest on the inside of the caliper, and we have roughly 2mm of clearance. It's pretty close, but that distance also shouldn't really change. Plus, cutting the amount of poke we had in half definitely made a difference appearance-wise, and it'll give us enough clearance to stop the tires from rubbing on the fenders. All that's left is to do it to the other side. Along with these spacers being functional in reducing the impact the fenders have on my tires, it's also kind of a cool moment. This will be the first time I get to see the big brake setup with likely the fitment that's going to stick around. And thankfully, I absolutely love how it looks. It's by no means perfect. There is still some poke in the front, but if we add camber, we're just going to mess up the alignment. And overall, this is a huge improvement. And while it distracted me for a while, sadly, it was a quick fix. On my way home, I got to thinking again. Why do I feel so drawn to improving things? It's like everything in my life is a project. No, I guess that's not quite right. Right now, I feel like my life is a project. I'm always looking for things that need improving. In my eyes, it's always hard to see anything as good enough. Always finding issues needing fixed, and spending time to fix them. On the surface, it's beautiful. You're constantly making improvements. But recently, I'm worried that that ideology is a slippery slope. There's this sentiment in life that what you find is often what you look for. And if all I look for is issues to fix, that's all I'm going to find. That's all I'm going to see around me. Things that are bad. Surrounding myself with only things I see as not good enough or needing improvement sure sounds like a great way to never be content with what I have. At least that's my worry for constantly hoping for things that could be. Sure, improving things is nice, but is it worth it with that as the cost? Maybe that's not always the best way to see things. No time to think about that though. The next thing to fix is already here. This is a billet short shifter by JHM, and from my initial observation, the quality lives up to its reputation. For something that's completely hidden under the car, it's absolutely gorgeous. There's just one issue. I really like how the current shifter in the B5 feels. To be honest, other than having quite a bit of play around the base from worn plastic, there's nothing really wrong about it. But then again, sometimes because of that play, it's hard to get into gear. But either way, I'm surprised there's so many complaints about the stock shift feel of this car online. It almost makes me think that there just might be something more at play here. I won't know anything about that until I get it all apart though. And the first step is taking off the cover, which will give us all the visibility we need to see the broken plastic. That amount of play would absolutely explain why shifts are inconsistent. Seems like the plastic ball and socket have just ground themselves together over time and now they hardly fit. Thankfully, the new one is billet, so I don't think we're going to have that issue whatsoever. All we have to do is remove the shift assembly. And weirdly enough, this being the third short shifter I've done, it's also installed completely differently than any of the others. This one's done entirely within the car, which is honestly kind of cool. There's quite a few layers to this puzzle, and to get the shifter out, quite a few things need to come off. Thankfully, nothing's really that complicated or hard to get to. It's all pretty straightforward, actually. The first thing I removed was the dust shield. 2 nuts on top, and then I could remove this absolutely gross and deteriorating plastic shield. The foam underneath had turned into some sort of a sticky goo. You never like to see it, and you absolutely never like to feel it. Unlike the TT, this is a linkage-based transmission, meaning by nature the shifts are really just going to feel better, at least in my opinion. The shift lever sits in this little socket and acts, well, as a lever. The bottom half connects to a shaft which connects to the transmission, and the way a short shifter makes these shifts shorter is by changing the ratio of the top and bottom halves of the lever. The longer the lever is on the bottom relative to the top, the less you have to move the top to shift into the same gear. And this whole assembly has a couple layers of nuts and screws holding it in place. The actual shifter itself sits on these rails inside the shift box, and those are only there so you can adjust its position and make sure getting the gears is actually possible. Thankfully, the shift box is easy to get out with 4 nuts on the top and bottom, and then we get access to some torque screws keeping those rails in place. But with all of that removed, the shifter should finally be able to come free. The only difficult part about this job is working in a tight space, but thankfully that's what extensions are for. And if something does fall, it can't get too far. As soon as I got this shifter out, I started to make an interesting observation. The actual lever itself is weirdly well made. It's everything around it that's falling apart. The yellowing plastic has pretty much completely sanded its way through the bottom, and consequently, there's just a ton of play. The weird thing is the shift rod is nice though. Actually, it's concerningly nice. Even more so, it's billet, which would be weird for OEM Audi. Oh, well, that would explain things. I think I just spent all of this time removing a short shifter just so that I can install a short shifter. No wonder I already like the gear feel so much. I wish I knew that ahead of time though, so I could have just replaced the ball and socket portion. Would have saved me a lot of money actually. But at the moment, I see no real reason not to install the JHM one. That billet replacement's gonna be a lot better than an OEM equivalent anyways. Plus, the kit came with new bushings for the rails, which also needed to be replaced. So overall, I think this will still be an upgrade. It's just there won't be a crazy reduction in throw since both of these short shifters actually have the same reduction, about 35%. The JHM one is adjustable though. Thankfully, getting everything apart is super simple actually. It's all held together with circlips, and with the proper pliers, comes apart very, very quickly. Side by side, it's really funny how similar these shifters actually are. I guess there is only so many ways you can design this though. Really, all it is a lever at the end of the day. But it's still funny nonetheless. The real difference in how it feels is absolutely going to come from the billet pivot point as opposed to the collapsing plastic. And as far as the throw reduction goes, I'm not going to adjust the JHM one at all. Like I said, I like the shifter that was on the car. My only issue with it is it was becoming increasingly notchy, and not in a good way. I feel like with gearboxes, there's good and bad notchy. In my opinion, good notchy is when you shift into a gear and you know that you're in gear. You feel it engage. Bad notchy actually affects how you shift into the gear. It almost stops you at the gate before letting you in, like you're getting caught on something. Almost like it's not aligned properly anymore because the plastic holding it in place is collapsing. In other words, even though this isn't as much of an upgrade as I first thought, I think it is an upgrade nonetheless. I care more about how easy it is and how good it feels to shift the car than how short the throw is itself. So if this makes any sort of an improvement that way, I'll be more than happy. And based on the tolerance of the new pivot point, I think it absolutely will. It's just going to be a matter of getting everything back in place in the car. Should be pretty simple too. After all, I already did all these steps to remove it. The only difficult part is going to be getting everything back in place when my hands barely fit. Such is life. The only part that was still in question was getting everything aligned. The black bolt on top adjusts how far the shifter sits forward and backwards, how far it can slide up and down the rail. The silver bracket on the bottom of the lever itself adjusts how far left and right the shifter sits. And this needs to be set up in the exact right position for all of the gears to be reachable and engage. It needs to be pretty precise as well, but thankfully there's a couple ways you can actually do this. You can do it by feel, you can do it by measuring, or sometimes you can get lucky and it'll be the same position that it was when you removed it. That's where pictures come in handy. That was the easiest to start, and I figured it would get us a good baseline. So I tried my best to tighten both the top and bottom adjusting screws in that position. Sadly, this didn't quite do it. It worked for all of the primary gears, but we had no reverse. We were getting close though, so I brought out the angle reader to make it better. The goal is to adjust it so that the shifter sits in neutral, 3 degrees to the right and 10 degrees back, or at least close enough to those measurements that you get all of your gears and it feels good. And honestly, doing it that way was so easy I should have started there to begin with. Immediately, all the gears were back, and I was finally ready to button everything up. So far, so good. Right now, everything feels great. Until I spend some time driving with it, I won't really know if I like it or not. So I guess there's no use beating around the bush. How good of a distraction was this? I drove the car for a while, and to be honest, at first, I really wasn't convinced it was any better. But pretty quickly, I started to change my mind about that. The big thing I wasn't sold on is the fact that the shift knob actually sits quite a bit higher than it used to with the old short shifter. And at first, it just felt weird, but honestly, I think that's just because I wasn't used to it. I drive this car a lot, and consequently, I was used to how things were, how things used to be, stuck in a rut of sorts. Not willing to acknowledge that sometimes change is for the best. You just gotta get used to it. After putting some miles on the shifter, I can wholeheartedly say that we did make an improvement. Shifts are crisp, downshifts are almost effortless, and because the shifter isn't notchy in a bad way anymore, I can shift quite a bit faster than I used to be able to. In other words, for how little I actually changed, this was a big improvement. And even though I was worried it wasn't going to be, it was absolutely worth it. I feel like only looking for things to improve is a very dangerous game. When you constantly look for issues to fix, you're absolutely going to find them. And if you just keep doing that, sooner than later, that's all you're going to be able to see. Nothing will ever be good enough. Everything needs improving. When I look at a lot of the aspects of my life, the only thing I can see are things that need fixing, things that could be better. The grass is always greener on the other side, right? Don't get me wrong, making improvements is nice, but getting stuck in the mindset that everything needs to be improved to be okay isn't healthy. There's no end to that, no contentment. That's just improvement without purpose. I think there has to be a balance between everything needing improvement and things being good enough. And that's not an easy balance to find, but I think it's something that I want to work towards. Something I think is worth it. After all, there's no point in improving things if you never appreciate what you've done because you're always looking for what's next. I'd much rather learn to be happy with things that really are good enough, and only spend time improving things that actually make a difference. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider dropping a like and subscribing for more. That's the best way you can support my content. Either way, I'll see you guys in the next episode. Thank you again. Have a wonderful day.